Montana Territory, 1883. The wind howled across the prairie like it had a soul set on mourning, and Barrett Pierce rode straight into it. He had not meant to stop in Dry Creek. Just a speck of dust blown off the map, halfway between nowhere and never mind. But the horse needed water, and Barrett, well, he was not sure what he needed, only that he had not found it yet. Maybe he was still looking for the part of him that war never gave back. He tied his gelding outside the general store and stepped down. That was when he heard it, a sharp cry, muffled by wood and distance. Not a coyote. Not the wind. A woman. Barrett turned. No one else seemed to hear it. The townsfolk kept their heads down, shoulders hunched, eyes trained on nothing. That was always a sign something was wrong. Another cry, this time clearer, desperate. Barrett followed the sound past the livery, around a half-burnt barn, to a shed that looked like it had not been touched in years. Rusted lock on the door. Boards nailed across it like someone was afraid of what was inside. Or ashamed. "Hello?" he called. A pause. Then a voice, hoarse. "Please, please. I did not do anything wrong." Barrett stepped forward. The lock was thick, but not stronger than his boot. One hard kick and the latch snapped. He gripped the edges of the door and tore it clean off the hinges with a grunt. The smell hit first. Sweat, fear, old blood. Then she stumbled forward, squinting against the light. Hair matted, lips split, wrists raw. She looked up at him like she did not believe he was real. "My name's Barrett," he said, steady and low. "You are safe now." She fell to her knees. He caught her before she hit the dirt. Her name was Josie Darnell. She was 24. Her husband, Wade, had locked her in that shed 3 days ago because she had spoken out of turn at supper, said the wrong thing about his brother's drinking. That was all. Barrett sat beside her on the stoop of the livery's back room, a blanket around her shoulders, handing her the second tin cup of water. "They all knew," she said quietly. "The neighbors, the storekeeper, the pastor. No one helped." Barrett said nothing. He had seen enough to know the truth of it. Josie looked up at him. "Why did you?" Barrett met her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe because I could." She studied him a long time, as if trying to decide if that was enough. Then she nodded once. "Thank you." That night, Wade Darnell came back drunk and angry. Barrett was waiting. Wade reached for the pistol at his belt. Barrett had his drawn first. "Leave," Barrett said flatly. "You come near her again, I will bury you." Wade gauged the look in Barrett's eyes, and for the first time in his life, he backed down, muttered something foul, and stumbled off into the dark. Josie had watched from the shadows. Barrett turned to her. "You have somewhere to go?" She shook her head. "Family? All dead. Or worse." Barrett nodded once. "Then you are coming with me." They rode out before sunrise. Josie wore a borrowed coat over her torn dress. She did not ask where they were going, and Barrett did not offer. It was enough that they were leaving. They stopped at a creek that afternoon so the horse could drink. Josie knelt by the water, washing her face, scrubbing at her skin like she could erase everything Wade had done. Barrett turned away to give her privacy. "Why do you ride alone?" she asked after a while. He glanced over. "Too many ghosts." Josie nodded. "I know that feeling." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that did not need filling. Then she looked at him again. "You tore the door off." He met her gaze. "I did. And you stayed." "I did." Her lips curved, just barely. "You are still staying?" Barrett leaned back on his elbows in the grass. "Seems like I am." Josie smiled for the first time since he met her. It was small, but it was real. They made camp in a patch of cottonwoods. Barrett built the fire, Josie laid out the bedrolls. "I do not know how to be anything," she said, watching the flames. I was never allowed to be. Barrett handed her a tin of beans. You do not have to be anything. Just be here. She looked at him, eyes soft. I do not think I have ever felt safe before, she said. Barrett's voice was quiet. You are now. That night, she woke up screaming. He was at her side before she could sit up, his hand gentle on her shoulder. It is all right, he murmured. You are here. You are with me. She clung to him like the world was spinning, and he held her until the trembling stopped. She looked up at him through tears. I am sorry. He shook his head. Never apologize for surviving. Her breath hitched. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest. You make it feel like maybe I can start over. Barrett's arms tightened around her. You are not starting over alone. They kept riding west for the next week. Josie's bruises faded. Her laugh came back, shy at first, then brighter. Barrett found himself watching her more than he should. The way she braided her hair. The way her eyes lit up when she saw wildflowers. She caught him once, looking. What? She asked, smiling. Barrett cleared his throat, flustered. Nothing. Just glad you are healing. Josie tilted her head, her smile soft. I am only healing because you stayed. Barrett looked away, heart thudding. He had not meant to fall for her, but somehow he already had. By the time they reached the high basin past Alder Gulch, the snowmelt had turned the earth soft and green. Elk grazed near the timberline, and the air smelled of wet pine and thawed stone. Barrett spotted an abandoned trapper's cabin tucked in a hollow where the aspen grew thick. The roof sagged but held, and the stone hearth was still sound. He rode ahead, tested the floorboards with his boot. They creaked but didn't give. Josie stood beside the horse, fingers tracing the saddle's edge. You thinking of staying? For a while, Barrett said. If you want. She looked at the cabin, then at the wild ridge beyond it. Something about this place feels like it doesn't expect anything from you. He nodded. That's worth more than most things. They unpacked slowly. She laid out the bedrolls in the loft while he patched the shutters and fetched water from the creek. Neither of them said the word home, but both felt it settling into the walls just the same. That night, she made cornbread with the last of the flour he'd traded for in Sheridan. It was rough and dense, but warm. They ate on the steps, watching clouds drag their shadows across the hills. I used to think quiet meant something was about to go wrong, she said, her voice low. Barrett didn't look away from the sky. Not all silences are the same. He heard her shift beside him. You don't ask much. I figure you'll say what you want when you're ready. Josie brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I used to keep a little box under the floorboard. I'd write notes to myself and hide them in there. Things I wasn't allowed to say out loud. Barrett turned toward her, his brow faintly drawn. Do you remember any? I remember the last one. Her eyes didn't leave the horizon. It said, You're not meant to disappear. Barrett didn't speak for a long while. Then, softly, You haven't. She gave a slow, steady nod. I'm starting to believe that. The wind moved through the grass like a tide, and neither of them said another word. In the morning, Barrett found her kneeling by the edge of the creek, sleeves rolled up, washing the worn apron she'd used for baking. He crouched nearby, watching the water bead on her skin. You ever trapped before? He asked. She glanced over her shoulder. No, but I can learn. He smiled faintly. There's a line not far from here. Beavers, mostly. I'll show you. She stood, wringing the cloth. You teaching me how to catch something means you'll have to trust one won't disappear into the woods. I don't reckon you will. Josie tilted her head. Why not? He met her eyes. Because you're learning how to stay. That afternoon, they followed the trapline together. He showed her how to spot fresh sign, how to check for sprung triggers without scaring off the rest. She was quick with her hands, patient when baiting, and never asked a question twice. They paused by a fallen pine, the sun warm on their backs. She leaned against the bark, brushing a twig from her skirt. "You ever miss anything from before?" Barrett kept his gaze on the trail ahead. "Sometimes. I miss the sound of my mother shelling peas on the porch. I miss the smell of my father's tobacco. Mostly I miss the way things felt before I knew how much could be taken." Josie didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "I miss the feel of my own name, back when it didn't make me flinch." Barrett looked at her then. "It doesn't now." Her eyes met his. "No, not when you say it." They made it back before dusk. She started a fire while he cleaned the traps, and the cabin filled with the scent of wood smoke and pine pitch. Later, while she stitched a tear in her hem by lantern light, he carved a handle for her own knife from a chunk of yew he'd brought down from the ridge. She noticed but said nothing, just smiled to herself and kept sewing. That night, as she banked the fire, he spoke from the doorway. "You don't owe me anything." She turned, her hands stilling. "I know. I want you to know that. Whatever comes next, it's not about debt." Josie crossed the room, slow and sure. She stood in front of him, close enough for the warmth between them to grow. "I don't feel owed," she said. "I feel chosen." Barrett's voice was quiet. "You are." She leaned in, her forehead resting lightly against his chest. His arms came around her, not in possession, but in welcome. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, softer this time, like it had changed its mind. The spring deepened slow and quiet in the high basin. Some mornings, frost still clung to the grasses, but by mid-afternoon the sun warmed the cabin walls and coaxed the first wild iris to bloom near the creek. Josie had taken to rising early, pulling on the wool shawl Barrett traded for in Virginia City, and walking the ridge before breakfast. She said little about what she thought during those walks, but there was a steadiness in her step now, a way her eyes settled on the landscape like it belonged to her as much as anyone. Barrett was splitting wood when she returned one morning, cheeks flushed from the wind. "There's a doe with twin fawns up near the bend," she said, brushing her skirt clean of pine needles. "They didn't startle when I passed." He looked toward the slope. "That's a good sign. They're learning the place is safe." Josie leaned against the fence he'd built to keep the mule from wandering. "Maybe I am too." Barrett set the axe down. "You thinking of staying through summer?" She glanced at the cabin, then back at him. "I haven't thought about leaving." He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. "I'll plant seed this week. If you're still here come time to harvest, I'll be glad of it." She tilted her head. "And if I help so, then it's yours as much as mine." Later that day, they worked the ground behind the cabin. The soil was rocky in places, but they cleared it together, her hands blistered by evening, his back aching in the familiar way that let a man know he'd done something honest. "I'm guessing you've done this before," she said, brushing dirt from her palms. "Not in years," he replied, setting the hoe aside. "But it comes back." Josie watched him a moment. "You were raised on land?" "A few miles east of Fort Laramie. My father carved a homestead out of cottonwood flats. We lost it after the war." She didn't press further, just nodded and picked up the seed sack. "Then you know enough to teach a woman who's never held anything that grew because of her own hands." Barrett met her gaze. "You've already held more than most." That night, he cooked rabbit over the coals while she stitched a tear in the curtain they'd hung at the window. The firelight made her hair catch the color of old gold, and when she reached across the table for her tin cup, her wrist brushed his. He didn't move away. "You said you lost your land," she said quietly. "Did you ever think about trying again?" He turned the rabbit once, bones cracking softly in the heat. I thought about it every year I didn't. She set the cup down. Then maybe this is the place. Barrett looked up. You think so? Josie nodded. It's a good thing, having to decide what to build instead of what to run from. He didn't answer, but there was something in the way he looked at her like her words had settled somewhere deep, where no one else had reached in a long time. By early June, the first green shoots broke the soil. Josie knelt beside them each morning, checking the rows, pulling weeds with care. She'd taken to humming while she worked, low and tuneless, but it carried across the yard and made the place feel lived in. Barrett spent those mornings mending the fence line and cutting more wood for the storehouse. They didn't speak much during chores, but when they did, it was easy, like the land itself had made room for them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the hills turned copper, Josie stood at the edge of the field, arms folded. Barrett came up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. You hear that? She asked. He listened. Crickets. And frogs, she added. Back in Missouri, they were the first sound of summer. Barrett nodded. Means the ground's warming. She turned to him. Do you ever wonder if something good can last? He didn't answer right away. Then, I wonder, but I'd rather find out than not try. Josie stepped closer, her voice low. I'd like to find out too. They stood that way as the sky darkened, quiet and close, the air between them thick with what hadn't been said but didn't need to be spoken. Later, inside, Barrett lit the lantern while she smoothed the quilt on the bed. The room felt small in a way that wasn't confining, just full. He watched her a moment, then reached for the carved U-handled knife he'd finished that week and set it gently on the table. For you, he said. Josie picked it up, fingers brushing the smooth wood. It's beautiful. You made this. He nodded. She looked up at him, eyes wide with something unguarded. No one's ever given me something made just for me before. Barrett's voice was quiet. Then I'm glad I'm the first. She crossed the room, stood before him, knife still in her hand. You ever think a place can heal what a person thought was ruined? He met her gaze. I think the right place with the right person can. Josie reached up, touched his face with the hand not holding the knife. Then I think we found it. He leaned in, and when their foreheads met, it wasn't a question, it was a promise. Outside, the wind slipped through the pines, and inside, the quiet filled with something steady and new. By midsummer, the wild sage had bloomed pale purple, and flies buzzed thick in the heat near the creek. Josie stood barefoot in the garden, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face, her hands dark with soil. Barrett watched her from the porch, sharpening his drawknife with slow, careful strokes. There was a rhythm to their days, now quiet, steady, marked by labor and the kind of ease that came only when nothing had to be explained. She straightened, brushed her palms on her skirt, and called across the yard. There's something growing near the fence I don't recognize. Might be bitterroot. Barrett set the blade aside and walked over. Show me. She led him to the edge of the fence line where a spindly cluster of pale stems pushed through the dirt. He crouched beside it, fingers brushing the petals. Not bitterroot, that's wild parsnip. Leaves'll burn if the sun hits sap on your skin. Josie stepped back. I'll dig it out then. He stood, brushing his knees. Best wear gloves. I've seen men blister up bad from that. She studied the plant a moment longer, then glanced toward the hills. I heard something last night. Sounded like boots on gravel. Barrett's expression shifted. You sure? I don't know. Could have been a mule shifting in the dark. But it didn't feel like that. He looked toward the trailhead that curved behind the ridge. I'll walk the perimeter after supper. Josie tilted her head. You think Wade's still trying to find me? Barrett didn't answer right away. Then, I think some men don't know when to let go of what they never valued. She folded her arms. You'd tell me if you saw sign? He met her eyes. Always. That night she didn't sleep. Barrett heard her rise from her pallet in the loft and come down the ladder with bare feet soft on the boards. He stayed lying on his back, letting the silence stretch between them. When she crossed the room and sat beside the fire, he joined her without a word. She glanced at him. I keep thinking I've outrun him, but then something small, a sound, a shadow brings it all back. Barrett rested his elbows on his knees. It'll take time. Josie nodded. I thought once I was out, I'd feel free. But sometimes I still feel like I'm checking for his voice in the corners. He looked at her, the firelight casting her features in gold and shadow. That's not weakness. That's memory. She drew her knees up beneath her chin. Do you dream of the war still? Not often. But when I do, it's not the battles. It's the waiting. The nights with nothing but breath and fear. She was quiet a long while. I think some part of me's still waiting, like I haven't fully stepped into this life yet. You will, he said. You already are. She looked at him then, her gaze steadier than it had ever been. I want to stop waiting. Barrett didn't touch her, but his voice was low and sure. Then stay in the now. With me. A long breath left her, and she nodded once. 2 days later, they rode into town. Supplies were running low, flour, salt, a new spool of thread for Josie's mending. It was the first time she'd set foot in Dry Creek since they left. She wore a blue blouse she'd stitched by hand, her hair braided tight to her scalp. No one looked her in the eye. Barrett stayed close, but didn't hover. When they reached the general store, she stepped in first. Mrs. Halpern, the storekeeper's wife, glanced up from behind the counter. Her mouth opened, then shut. Josie walked straight to the flour sack, lifted it, and set it on the counter with steady hands. Mrs. Halpern cleared her throat. Glad to see you well. Josie didn't blink. I'm not just well. I'm living. Barrett handed over the coin. Neither of them looked back when they left. On the way out of town, a man stepped from the shadows near the livery, a wiry figure with a sunburned neck and a twitch in his right eye. Barrett's hand moved to his side. Josie's jaw clenched. The man raised both palms. Ain't looking for trouble. Just heard she was alive. Heard she was with you. You heard right, Barrett said. The man's eyes flicked to Josie. Wade's gone. Took off east a month back. Sheriff's got no word since. Josie didn't speak. The man scratched his jaw. Just thought you'd want to know. Barrett nodded once. You told us. Now move on. The man did. Back in the saddle, Josie kept her eyes on the horizon. If he's gone, why don't I feel lighter? Because it wasn't just Wade. It was everything he made you believe about yourself. She looked at him. And what do you believe? Barrett didn't hesitate. That you have more strength in you than anything that tried to break you. That night, she kissed him. Not out of fear, not out of gratitude, but with the slow certainty of someone choosing to begin. He held her face like she was something he'd never been allowed to want before. When her hands settled at his sides, there was no weight of past between them, only the quiet, hard-won knowledge that neither had to carry their old lives alone anymore. Outside, the wind barely stirred. Inside, it was warm and full and still. The days lengthened until evening light lingered well past supper, and the air carried the scent of warmed pine and sun-cured grass. Josie sat on the porch bench, needle in hand, mending a tear in Barrett's work shirt where the sleeve had caught on wire. Her stitching had grown sure-footed, even, and quiet, the kind of task that settled her mind after hours spent in the garden rows. Barrett came up from the lower field, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, his shirt damp along the collar. He dropped the rope by the post and sat beside her, boots leaving dry dust prints on the step. You've got a knack for fixing things, he said. watching the needle glide. "You give me enough holes, I'll keep busy," she replied, then added, "Might not stitch as straight as your ma, but it holds." He leaned back, arm resting along the bench rail. "She sewed fast, but not careful. My sister used to say her seams could scare a snake." Josie laughed, the sound low and warm. "I'd have liked to meet her." Barrett nodded. "She'd have liked you." She didn't trust many women, but she trusted the ones who'd been through fire. Josie paused, the needle stilled between fingers. "You ever think about what comes next?" He looked out past the fence line, where the grass rolled into the rim of trees. "Every day." She set the shirt aside. "So do I. I don't know what a future looks like when it's not borrowed or stolen." Barrett turned toward her, his gaze steady. "It looks like morning coffee and planting by the moon. It looks like two horses hitched together, not one leading the other. You and me, side by side." She reached for his hand, rough against her palm. "Then I'd like to build that." They spent that July gathering stone from the creek to line a root cellar. Josie learned to swing a mallet without bruising her wrist, and Barrett taught her how to stack for drainage. When they finished, she stepped back and pressed her dirt-streaked hands to her hips. "You think it'll hold through winter?" she asked. Barrett nodded. "It will. We built it together." That night, thunder rolled low over the mountains, and the rain came heavy. They sat by the hearth, fire crackling, while Barrett read from one of the old books they'd bartered from the circuit preacher, a worn volume of poetry, its spine stitched with twine. Josie leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes half closed. "Did you ever imagine yourself here?" He turned a page slowly. "No. I didn't think I'd live long enough to want something like this." She nestled closer. "You do now." "I do." By August, the first tomatoes ripened on the vine, and the nights grew cool enough that they pulled the quilt up before dawn. Josie began writing again, not hidden notes hastily buried but letters she never mailed, kept in a folded cloth under her pillow. Some addressed to no one, some to the girl she had once been. One evening, she handed one to Barrett. He unfolded it, eyes scanning the page. When he finished, he set it gently on the table and looked at her. "I didn't know you wrote like that." "I didn't either. Not until I had something worth saying." He rested his hand over hers. "You still have that box?" She shook her head. "Left it behind." Barrett stood, crossed to the shelf, and pulled down a small wooden case, one he'd carved from leftover pine. "Then you can start a new one. For the woman you are now." Josie opened the lid slowly, then looked up at him, her voice soft. "I think I stopped hiding the day you opened that shed door. I think you were waiting for someone to see you. I was waiting for someone to stay." Barrett knelt in front of her, both hands resting on her knees. "Then let me ask you straight. Do you want a life with me here? Through all of it, the work, the quiet, the choosing each other every day." She cupped his face, fingers brushing the scar near his temple. "Yes, I want the whole of it." They married under the cottonwoods before the first frost. The preacher from Willow Creek rode up on a borrowed mule, and two neighbors came as witnesses, each bringing a pie and a bottle of sweet cider. Josie wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin dyed with indigo, and Barrett wore his father's coat, the shoulders patched with care. When Josie placed her hand in Barrett's, there was no trembling, only the weight of something deeply rooted and calm. "I give you everything I am," she said. Barrett looked at her like she was the first sunrise after a long winter. "And I give you all that I have." Afterward, they danced to the tune of a fiddle string played soft and slow, just the two of them beneath the trees, the wind threading through the branches like a blessing. Years passed, but the rhythm they built never frayed. They planted an orchard, dug a well, and raised two hounds that slept on the porch steps. In the evenings, Josie read aloud while Barrett carved small things for the shelf: bowls, spoons. Once a cradle he never finished but kept tucked away, as if hope could live inside curved wood. When the first snow came, they walked the field hand in hand, the whole world wrapped in white silence. Josie leaned into him, her breath visible in the air. "Do you ever miss the road?" she asked. He looked down at her, eyes kind. "Only when you're not on it with me." She smiled, and they stood there a long while, watching the snow fall, the cabin warm behind them, the sky wide and waiting. Inside, a fire glowed steady, and beside it, on a shelf built by calloused hands, sat a small pine box filled with letters, the beginning of a life made whole.